I don't think materialism is really a metaphysical theory. I think it's just a mistake. It's the same thing as saying that 2 plus 2 equals 5 is an equation. It's not really an equation. It's just a mistake. Materialism is just nonsense. And materialism, as we understand it today, is really derived from Cartesian metaphysics, from Descartes. And Descartes himself moved away from the hylomorphic metaphysics of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and so on, which I think are pretty good metaphysics. And Descartes basically said that everything that exists is either res cogitans, which is a mental substance, or res extensa, which is a physical extended thing in space. And I think it's actually a pretty bad metaphysical way of looking at things. But what happened was that Descartes' ideas caught on quite a bit over a couple of centuries, and then the materialists just got rid of the res cogitans. So the only thing left is the res extensa. So the materialist idea of matter is just stuff that has volume and mass. That's matter. And that's a really impoverished metaphysical perspective that doesn't explain anything, frankly. It's just a dumb idea. There have been all kinds of ways to try to square that circle. And people generally, unconsciously, modern thinkers tend to come from a Cartesian perspective. That is, they think that the only reality is just physical stuff, lumps of stuff. And that's a really lousy way of looking at the world. It doesn't work. It's bad science, and it's bad logic, and it's bad metaphysics. So they're struggling with it. And some people say, okay, well, then maybe reality is a simulation. Of course, but a simulation presupposes a process of computation, which the simulation itself doesn't explain. All right, a simulation can't simulate itself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a viewpoint that's gaining a lot of popularity among folks lately, which is panpsychism, which is the idea that there's sort of mental content everywhere. Like even atoms have a little bit of a mind inside of them. And of course, I don't think that's true. But I think what people who are talking about simulation and people who are talking about panpsychism are implicitly acknowledging is that materialism completely fails, and you have to bring mind into it somehow. But for some reason, they don't want to bring God into it. That is, that it's such a simple answer. And this is why I think one of the most beautiful ideas in all of human thought was Augustine's insight that everything that exists, including us, is a thought in God's mind. And that explains everything. It explains why mind seems so fundamental. It explains the laws of nature. It explains nature itself, explains creation, explains our souls. Everything that exists is a thought. And that was Plato's original idea. I mean, Plato is the first idealist. And Plato made the point, which is exactly true, is that ideas are more real than physical things are. The most real thing is an idea. Physical things are derivative of ideas. Plato's stumble there was that he didn't have any place to put the ideas. That is, the ideas didn't have a home. And what the Christian Platonists, and Augustine was a Christian Platonist, they clean that up by pointing out, yes, the most real things are ideas, and those ideas are ideas in God's mind. That's why they're the most real, because they're God's thoughts. So it's a very deep insight and a very deep way of looking at things. And the takeaway from it is that materialism fails utterly, and it should be abandoned as a metaphysical perspective, and it should be abandoned as a framework for science.
Yeah, it's super interesting stuff. I want to get back to the neuroscience in a second, but you really got me thinking about a lot of this philosophical stuff as well. And it just at a basic level, again, I'm not a trained philosopher or a scientist. I'm always trying to think and learn and understand. And just based on what you're saying, it seems like just at the most obvious basic level, a better explanation of things that mind is derivative of mind, that intelligence is a derivative of intelligence, that consciousness is derivative of consciousness, that love is derivative of love, that reason is derivative of reason, and on and on and on. That just seems to be a far more logical conclusion than that, especially in light of like Newton's insight into entropy and everything is winding down and everything is decaying according to the second law of thermodynamics. But at the same time, there's all of these emergent properties coming out of chaos and matter, like that reason and love and consciousness and humanity is somehow ultimately just material. It just seems to be such a wildly insufficient way of analyzing what we now know for sure to be true, which is that there are these one things on this one planet called Earth that are capable of a whole lot that doesn't seem to be explainable materialistically.
Well, Alfred North Whitehead was a famous mathematician in the early 20th century, who was also a pretty good philosopher. And he made a comment one time that I think is very true, and that is that all of philosophy, all the history of philosophy, is footnotes to Plato. That basically Plato's idea, which I think is fundamentally right, it's incomplete, and Christian Platonists have made it much more complete. But Plato's basic idea is that the most fundamental reality is mental, not physical. Physical is all derivative of mental. And you made a wonderful point earlier when you were saying that love comes from love. You know, that all of the things we experience as human beings are best understood as coming from an analogous kind of mental state. That everything comes from mind, but also that matter comes from mind. That even things that we think of as physical are really in their fundamental, in a fundamental sense, mental. And I think that's the deepest insight. And I do think that ultimately the truth is either Platonic or not Platonic. That is, that either mind is fundamental or matter is fundamental. And I think all the evidence and all the logic is on the side of the viewpoint that mind is fundamental. And Augustine said it so beautifully, that everything that exists is a thought in the mind of God.
Information can also be used for nefarious purposes. In fact, for those who don't already know, data brokers will sell your information without your knowledge and in many cases without your consent. This is something I really did not feel the weight of until the past few years when I realized the actual risks this exposes you to. So today I'm telling you guys about a company called Incogni because the service they provide is actually useful. They hunt down where your information has been leaked and scrub it from all those databases. They tackle the legal hassle of requesting your information to be removed, which restores your online security and privacy, but it also spares you a lot of time and stress. Believe me, I know this the hard way. It's actually a very good feeling not having to worry about your personal information falling into the hands of bad actors. Incogni has also helped me to cut out those annoying spam calls and emails. So break up with Scam Likely. Take back control of your online privacy. Check out incogni.com/dose of wisdom or use the promo code dose of wisdom in the link below to get a whopping 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Once again, that's incogni.com/dose of wisdom or use the promo code dose of wisdom to get 60% off. I also think if I'm just fully showing my Christian cards, I do think it's remarkable and beautiful that God created us in such a way that we can, as sub-creators, participate in that endeavor where we can imagine something and manifest it. That's not necessarily the case, but he allows us to be able to operate as engineers and to make engineering, or as artists and to make art. Like he allows us to participate within the Imago Dei in that capacity that he has at the highest level, but our participation in it almost gives us a clue to our own existence. That in the same way an artist can create a thing that did not exist at all before, from his imagination, from his love, maybe even if he's painting, a portrait of his wife or whatever. That's, I think, cluing us into our own creation, our own existence.
I agree, and it's an example, as you said, of the fact that we're created in God's image. I also think of it as evidence for God's love for us. That is that in some sense, and you shouldn't anthropomorphize God too much, but in some sense, God longs for us before we long for Him, and God wants us to come to Him, and that's kind of what I experienced in the chapel when I told God I didn't want my son to be autistic to me, and He said, "But that's what you're doing to me." And God wants us just like we want Him.
One thing that really touched me when I was reading that part of your story is I can think of basically only one time in my life when I had the experience of sort of hearing the voice of God. And it was actually quite a similar thing. I was really wrestling through some of the baggage in my family tree, and I was praying, and as I was praying, visualizing this kind of dark, gnarled family tree with alcoholism and all these, nasty things going up into it. And then as I was praying about that, well, what kind of man will I ever be able to be if this is what I'm rooted in or where I come from? And God brought into my mind this other tree that was white and shining and pure and perfect in every way. And I'm like, what is that? And again, not an audible voice, but not my thoughts, and as clear as can be, 6 words. You're my boy too, or how many words is that? You're my boy too, you. Yeah, no. and those 6 words were just like a lightning bolt into my heart, into my mind. Like, this is a true thing about me that has forever shaped my identity and the rest of my life. That I'm not limited based on family of origin, because I'm actually adopted into another family. So anyways, reading your story reminded me of that. And I knew exactly what you meant when I read that part, that it's like you didn't actually hear this booming audible voice, but it was like a clear message that was unmistakable for your own thought.
Yes, and it was not my thought. That was the interesting thing that I noticed, is that it wasn't from me. And one way of looking at it, I mean, we all carry baggage, both personal baggage and family baggage. I mean, I've got plenty of my own family baggage, and but one way of looking at it that I think is very helpful is that we don't come from our families; we come from God. Each human soul is created by God at conception. So we are created directly by God. We come through our families. It's kind of the passageway, the way we get here. Chesterton at one point said that the human condition that we find ourselves in is quite remarkable, meaning what happens is that we are, as babies, simply drop down a chimney, that we just get dropped off. And we have no control over that. We have no control what family we're born into. We just are dropped off. But that's not our origin. Our origin is from God. And we are come through our families, but we don't come from our families. And I mean, I've got lots of my own baggage. Frankly, I think most people do.
Yeah, well, it also, what you just said there also reminds me of what you described about how your imagination, your heart, your thoughts would wander to that mansion. And that reminded me of C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you are familiar with his version of that, which was being haunted by northernness, the great landscape of the mountains that as a young boy just called to his heart. And he describes it like a pang of joy. What is this longing that I have for something otherworldly? Basically, he's haunted by heaven. Yes. And he searches his whole life to try to understand what is the nature of the longing that he has, and finally concludes that it's something that this world can't satisfy, which is itself a clue that there is a world beyond, which reminds me very much of what you're saying as well.
Yeah. And he also pointed out that every longing we have that we know of corresponds to something that's real and that's attainable. That is, that we don't long for things that we couldn't possibly have. So it gave him confidence that heaven is real and that our destiny is with God, because we wouldn't long for it if it weren't really possible for us.
I'm gonna kick myself if I don't get back to the neuroscience when I'm talking to a neurosurgeon. Although I'm loving the kind of unexpected philosophical direction that it took. It is not too late to join the conversation. If you click the link below, you can do so. We're going to read this book over the next 4 weeks, and then we are going to be joined by Dr. Egnor for a Q&A, a live Q&A in the Wisdom Society. So please join the conversation. Also, you'll get to meet some really cool people that I have really been blessed by over the last coming up on a year within the Wisdom Society. So maybe this is your chance to join the conversation, to read with us The Immortal Mind. Hope to see you there.